Hey everyone, Pastor Jamal Bryant finally addressed the years of swirling rumors, speculation and scandal surrounding his marriage to Gizelle Bryant. It wasn't done through a press release or a rehearsed public statement. It came from a place of exhaustion, humility, and a desperate desire to reclaim his truth after decades of whispers that had nearly destroyed his reputation, his ministry, and his peace. For years, Jamal Bryant, one of the most charismatic, eloquent, and controversial figures in the Black church, has lived under a cloud of personal drama that blurred the line between pulpit and publicity. As the pastor of New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Atlanta and the ex-husband of Real Housewives of Potomac star Gizelle Bryant, Jamal's life has always existed in the strange intersection between faith and fame. A place where sermons go viral, but so do scandals. And for too long, those scandals seem to define him more than his message. The rumours began long before Gizelle ever became a household name. Whispers of infidelity, moral failings, and broken promises that seemed impossible to separate from the man who preached holiness every Sunday. Jamal Bryant was known as a firebrand, handsome, articulate, magnetic. A preacher who could move a crowd to tears with one breath and to laughter with the next. He was the future of the Black church, the heir apparent to a new generation of social gospel leaders. Someone who mixed activism with an unapologetically modern edge. But that same charm, that same energy that drew people in, became the very thing that led to his undoing. When the rumours about his affairs began to surface in the mid-2000s, they didn't just threaten his marriage, they threatened his ministry. Gizelle, his college sweetheart, and the first lady of his Baltimore congregation stood by him for as long as she could. But the walls were closing in. Members left the church, tabloids feasted on every rumour, and the man who once represented the promise of a new kind of preacher was suddenly the face of hypocrisy. And when Gizelle eventually filed for divorce in 2008, citing adultery and irreconcilable differences, the world assumed it knew the full story. Yet what fans of Real Housewives of Potomac and followers of New Birth never fully grasped, until Jamal himself recently admitted it, is that the rumours weren't just exaggerated headlines. Many of them, painfully, were true. In a rare moment of candour during a sermon that has since been widely shared online, Jamal Bryant spoke openly about the man he used to be. Not the pastor, not the public figure, but the flawed, prideful husband who, in his own words, let ego ruin what love had built. He said, "I was called to preach long before I learned how to be faithful. I could lead a congregation, but I couldn't lead my home." That statement alone sent shockwaves through his followers because it was the first time he had ever publicly taken ownership of the very rumours that haunted him for years. He didn't name names, nor did he offer excuses. He simply admitted that he had failed his wife in his calling during that period. But the story doesn't end there. What makes Jamal Bryant's confession even more complex and tragic is that his and Gizelle's relationship never truly ended, at least not emotionally. Years after their divorce, when the Real Housewives of Potomac reintroduced Gizelle Bryant to the public eye, the world watched as old wounds and new possibilities collided on national television. Fans were shocked when Gizelle revealed that she and Jamal had begun rekindling their relationship, trying to rebuild the love that once fell apart under the weight of betrayal. But instead of redemption, what followed was another wave of rumours. Accusations that Jamal was again being unfaithful, that his public reconciliation with Gizelle was more for television than truth. At one point, fellow cast member Monique Samuels even confronted Gizelle on camera, brandishing alleged receipts of Jamal's infidelity, turning what should have been a private matter into one of the most scandalous moments in the show's history. Jamal denied the most outrageous claims at the time, calling them recycled lies, but the damage was already done. His name trended for days, not for his ministry but for his alleged misconduct. And behind the scenes, the strain between him and Gizelle grew unbearable once again. Their rekindled romance quietly dissolved and both returned to focusing on their separate lives. Jamal to his church in Atlanta, Gizelle to her reality TV empire. But years later, when Jamal finally broke his silence, his words revealed not anger or defensiveness, but remorse. "I lost something sacred because I wasn't sacred," he said. "I wanted to be the pastor the people saw, but I hadn't become the man God wanted me to be." He described the end of his marriage as the spiritual breaking that forced him to confront his humanity. Admitting that for too long he'd tried to balance two lives, the one on the pulpit and the one behind closed doors. "When you live in two worlds," he said, "one will always collapse." His confession wasn't just about adultery, it was about accountability. He acknowledged that fame, ego, and the pressure of being a celebrity pastor distorted his priorities. He admitted that while he was preaching to save souls, he was losing his own. And in that honesty, something shifted. Many who had once turned away from him began to see a man who had finally stopped hiding behind the collar. Yet, even with his confession, the shadow of those years continues to follow him. In the age of social media, every sermon clip and dating rumor becomes instant fodder for gossip, and Jamal's name is never far from controversy. But what most people don't see, and what he's tried to make clear in his later messages, is that he's been working tirelessly to rebuild not just his image, but his integrity. He's been leading community outreach programs, fighting against injustice, and focusing on spiritual restoration rather than platform building. Still, for many, the question remains, can a man who publicly fell so hard ever truly regain trust? Gizelle herself has addressed that question on Real Housewives of Potomac, saying that while she'll always love Jamal as the father of her children, she knows the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. "He's grown," she said, "but we're not meant to be together again. Some lessons come with scars." And perhaps that's the most painful truth in all of this, that love, even when genuine, doesn't always survive the consequences of betrayal. Jamal's story isn't just the story of a pastor who fell, it's the story of a man who tried to live up to divine expectations while wrestling with very human weaknesses. His marriage became collateral damage in that war. Now, as he continues preaching about grace and redemption, his message hits different because it's no longer theoretical. It's lived experience. "I am not proud of who I was," he told his congregation, "but I thank God I'm not that man anymore." Whether people believe him or not, one thing is certain. For the first time, Jamal Bryant stopped running from the truth. He admitted the rumors, he took ownership of his failures, and he faced the world not as Pastor Bryant, but as Jamal, a man who broke his vows, broke his family, and is now trying to rebuild his soul. And in that admission, raw, uncomfortable, and long overdue, he may have finally begun the journey towards the one thing no sermon could ever give him: redemption. Thanks for watching.